salted butter shortbread chocolate chip cookies. Have you heard of these? They have been all over the place for the last couple years. So many of you have asked me if they're worth making. I thought, let's make them together. And then you can decide whether it would be worth it for you to make it in your real life. I'm actually using the recipe printed off from Smitten Kitchen. So 2 trusted sources. The originator of the recipe was Allison Roman. Then Deb posted it over at Smitten Kitchen. We're just gonna go based off of her recipe. So you're gonna wanna add to your mixer cold butter. Don't soften it, don't melt it, you just want cold butter. Honestly, I think the reason that this recipe appealed to me on so many levels when I first saw it was because it says to use salted butter. Salted butter is my jam. So this recipe specifically says salted butter is better than unsalted butter. That just like kind of spoke to my heart. So you're gonna add 2 sticks of salted butter. How many times can I say salted butter? We're gonna throw those right in. I just pulled it out of the refrigerator. We're throwing that right into our mixer. So it calls for 2 sticks plus 2 tablespoons. The food nerd in me can't help but weigh my ingredients. So you can just get a regular measuring cup and measure them in by volume. I just got out my kitchen scale right here. And I'm going to weigh them just so that we can have a really accurate representation of how these should turn out. But again, I'm using Costco butter, so I probably shouldn't be the one to lecture you about using a kitchen scale. So we're gonna use 1/2 cup of granulated sugar. I'm gonna go get that. 100 grams. Pour that in there. And then 1/4 cup of brown sugar. Okay, 1/4 cup of brown sugar says 50 grams, 51, we're going with it. Dump that in, boink. Okay, and then we're going to add the vanilla. Costco, it's precious and very expensive. So on my blog, I talked about the other day about using emulsions in the place of vanilla. You can do that. You can use imitation if there's a brand of imitation vanilla that you really like. Now we're just gonna mix that up. Now cold butter in a mixer is gonna sound a little wonky. Okay, so it's just been mixing for a couple seconds. It's slowly, by some miracle, going to come together. I can feel it. Guppy. Okay, so you can see how that butter softened right up, and it looks pretty light and fluffy to me. Okay, so now we're gonna add the flour. I've already put it in my bowl and put it on my kitchen scale. It's about 2 1/4 cups. But if you're measuring that and not weighing it, I would measure it with a light hand because it only took me about 2 cups to get to the weight measure that they list on the recipe. So we're gonna throw that right in. Oh, my timer's going off because I gotta get bread out of the oven. I'll be right back. Okay, so we're gonna mix in the flour just until it's combined. We don't wanna overmix it here, and then we're gonna add in the chocolate. This recipe calls for chopping your own chocolate into pieces. Apparently that's to avoid chocolate chips congregating together. You might wanna chop up your own chocolate. For today's recipe, because I have a sick child on the couch and I have bread coming out of the oven, we're gonna use chocolate chips. This is where I keep my chocolate chips, and you can see we have a serious problem because I'm almost out. Going to have to replenish that supply. So I've only mixed the dough part way. I'll show you, I'll flip the camera around and show you. But I'm just gonna add in 1 cup of chocolate chips. Okay, you can see that flour is not really mixed in as well as it should have been, but I added the chocolate chips, and now we're just gonna mix that up just until it comes together. Okay, there's some dry bits on the bottom, but I'm just gonna get those up with my hands. We're gonna roll this mixture into two little logs. And I'm just gonna kind of get into that bowl and get the dry, so you can see kind of, I'm just gonna get that dry stuff up off the bottom and mash it all together. Raw flour is not the healthiest thing for you. And I would ask each of you to examine yourselves morally and ethically to decide whether eating raw flour is appropriate, and I really mean that. I don't want to be responsible for those decisions on your behalf, but I am just gonna take like a tiny little taste just to see. Get some parchment or wax paper. Get these little babies into 2 log shapes about 2 inches in diameter. I wouldn't get the ruler out, I would just eyeball it. We're gonna roll them up. Now the recipe says to chill these thoroughly for 2 hours. But you can also speed it up by putting them in the freezer. And since I have to go get kids from school, we're gonna go the freezer route. Okay, so the dough's been chilling in the freezer for probably about 30 minutes, maybe a little less, but I've got to take it out because I'm out of time. Yeah, I think that's about good. Any longer, and I'm not sure I'd be getting a knife through this. So I'm just whisking up the egg that's going to be brushed on the outside of this shortbread cookie dough. What it does is it helps the coarse sugar adhere to the shortbread, and that's what makes this shortbread really special in my opinion. And when it bakes, it kind of like caramelizes and melts into this crusty, sugary layer. It's ridiculously good. I just have Bob's Red Mill. Can you see through my little Ziploc here? Just some Bob's Red Mill turbinado sugar. I know some people have been turned off from this recipe because they don't have that kind of sugar. It's not really a pantry staple, I would say. People wonder if you can use like granulated sugar or maybe brown sugar. It's just not gonna give that same like ethereally yummy, crunchy, sugary layer. I'm actually gonna take my sugar and kind of pour it over the top. Last time I poured it onto the parchment and then kind of rolled it up, but I'm wondering if this might work a little bit better. I'm thinking that was a really good idea. Go Mel. We're just gonna cut this up. So we're gonna go for, I think that's about a 1/2 inch here. Let me do, so you're gonna encounter some of those congregated chocolate chips and they're gonna pop out. You see how that's popped out? It's not a big deal. You can wedge them back in if you want. You see that? That's about what we're going for. That's maybe thick-ish, but thick-ish is not a bad thing with these cookies. Here, this is about how far apart. Now the ends of them, you see, they're a little wonky, and I'll probably bake them actually face down like that, so there's a little sugar crust on the outside, but they're gonna be delicious, even if they don't look perfect. In they go. We're gonna go 12 minutes. Okay, so I'm gonna let these cookies cool on the baking sheet for a little while. I've gotta go get my kids from school. Actually, I totally lied. These cookies are still really warm, and I just ate the end, that little domed, ugly end. It's hot, really warm, and it's delicious. It's been about an hour or so since these cookies came out of the oven. You can see a close-up of that crackly turbinado sugar, which is what really sets these apart and makes them super amazing. It just kind of snaps apart. So they're not soft and chewy, they're shortbready. That sugary crust, it almost, that crackly sugary crust is so good. My vote is make them at home.
Yep.
They're worth it.
Yep.
And if you're so inclined, in the comments, let me know what recipe I should make next.